Hello everyone and welcome back to Red Room Stories. I know many of you tune into these tales to help you drift off to sleep. So before we settle in, I'd love for each of you to leave a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. The old community center loomed at the edge of town like a gravestone, a skeletal reminder of past gatherings, its once bright paint peeling into a sad tapestry of muted colors under the weight of neglect. Evie had always been drawn to the place, not for its history, but for the whispers she'd heard as a child, stories of the children who had disappeared during a summer festival 2 decades prior, their laughter replaced by an unsettling silence. As dusk crept closer and the shadows lengthened, she found herself standing alone before the entrance, drawn by a strange compulsion to explore the secrets hidden within. Stepping inside, the wooden floors groaned beneath her weight, releasing a familiar musty scent that spoke of mildew and dust. The air hung thick with memories, pressing against her skin like an unwilling cloak. Flashes of joy and terror danced in the corners of her mind as she recalled tales of faces forever lost, laughter frozen in time, and prepared unease settled in her stomach as she progressed, the dim light flickering overhead like a warning, illuminating worn posters from past events that adorned the walls. Each glance brought the unsettling realization that she was not alone. Shadows seemed to stretch and warp, shifting with the rhythm of her heartbeat. The main hall beckoned with its high ceilings and crumbling chandeliers hanging like the fallen stars of some forgotten dream. It was said that if you listened hard enough, you could hear the echoes of the lost children, their games playing over and over again in an endless loop. The floor was gritty underfoot, an uncomfortable reminder of how long it had been since life thrived here. Evie's breath quickened as her mind raced back to the stories that had turned the children into temporary ghosts. Suspended between safety and danger, a chill swept through, contrary to the warm summer air outside, the sensation crawling along her spine and igniting her instincts. With no other choice but to delve deeper into the labyrinth of rooms and hallways, Evie stepped cautiously through the entrance to the storage room, a small unlit space filled with forgotten relics. Her fingers brushed against dust-covered boxes, the musty odor thickening, clash of mold and decay assaulting her senses. A faint noise echoed, a soft thump, rhythmically pulsing in the silence. It called to her, and despite every alarm ringing, in her head she followed the sound, a heartbeat against the emptiness drawing her closer to the inner recesses of the center. Each room held a different piece of the past, ghostly remnants of celebrations long since turned to dust. But as she ventured further into the bowels of the building, an unsettling dread began to claw its way to the forefront of her mind. The air was thickening, growing heavier with every step. Strange texts scratched onto the walls could almost be words, barely decipherable. A child's handwriting, perhaps. She could not resist them, the ancient language of lost innocence, an invisible thread weaving a tapestry of dread around her heart. A sudden echo broke the spell, a singular loud crash from the basement below. Evie froze, her heart thumping violently against her ribs, each beat a reminder of her isolation. Footsteps echoed, heavy, irregular, uncaring, and before she could fathom their source, a breath seemed to whisper in her ear, cold and sharp as ice. She turned swiftly, the pulse in her throat throbbing like a warning bell. The door she had come through now stood ajar, 2 darknesses competing to pull her into their respective nightmares. The familiar escape and the unseen figure lurking beyond. Compelled by a mixture of dread and curiosity, Evie approached the steps descending into the basement. Each footstep pronounced against the wooden stair creaks, an invitation to the depths of whatever lingered there. The darkness throbbed, absorbing light as she descended, the air tightening around her, a vice pressing in slowly, with malicious intent. Thick cobwebs clung to her fingertips, their presence like the fingers of something unseen, keeping her tethered to forbidden knowledge. With a sudden resolve, she reached the bottom, the profound quiet swallowing her whole. The basement was a world entangled with shadows, revealing remnants of forgotten machinery and toppled displays. Evie's breath caught in her throat as she finally spotted it, the source of the noise. A playroom of sorts lay adjacent, strewn with old toys, perfect and pristine under the grime of time, as if placed there just hours ago. Her heart raced. These were the same toys the lost children had played with so long ago, but now they tumbled lifelessly, like ghosts wishing for resurrection. A fine, icy mist crept alongside her, wrapping around her ankles like tendrils, seeking warmth and life. Just then, a childish giggle pierced the stillness, echoing through the board walls. Evie's skin prickled at the familiarity of that laugh, the sound tugging at deeply buried memories and anxieties. She felt the presence coalesce behind the door of solitude, just out of sight, teasingly near. This was wrong. This was all wrong. The footsteps she thought she had heard before loomed closer, insistent and demanding, and the cold seeped deeper into her bones. Panicking, Evie darted to the exit, but the winding paths warped before her, twisting like the dreams she had tried to escape. The walls closed in, and shadows blossomed into figures. Faces morphed into grotesque distortion, beckoning her to join their realm. She gasped, fear erupting into sheer terror as she understood the truth. She was not meant to leave, not until she understood the fate of the children who had once played here. The missing pieces of her mind hinted at a malevolent circle. She had come searching for answers, but their laughter had been a tragedy and a trap, drawing her with promises of lost joy. Time shattered around her within the suffocating stone walls. She felt her own shadow stretch and crawl, twisting into something unrecognizable, whispering secrets of abandonment, of eternity spent within this amber prison. The toys began to shift again, filling the silence with laughter, while the figures surged closer, their playful countenance now sinister and twisted. Evie was trapped in a dance of nightmares, her body betraying her as feet against the solid ground stood powerless. In one final surge of clarity, she turned toward the voices, accusing and haunting. The shadows closed in, and as they enveloped her, she realized in horror. Their happiness came from her despair, their laughter savoring her fear. But within that realization lay a thread of madness as the echoes merged with her own mind, blending into a unity of despair, echoing the truth she had stumbled into. Evie felt memories and identities melding as the laughter crescendoed into wails, drowning her in a sea of lost innocence and seduction. As darkness consumed her, leaving nothing behind but emptiness and echoes, a final thought flared through her mind, a chilling whisper, twisted and ironic. She had found the lost children. They were now a part of her, ensnared in a cycle of laughter that would never fade, never stop. Outside, the moon kissed the roof of the community center, unaware of the horrors contained within, as new whispers began weaving their dark, sweet stories for the next curious soul brave enough to listen. In the fading light of a late autumn afternoon, a trepidation hung thick in the air, as though the shadows themselves were thickening like smoke. Evelyn had always felt a peculiar pull towards the old Hartley manor, perched like a specter on the edge of Wither Woods. It sat heavy within her memory, its rotting timbers blending into the overgrown underbrush, offering a strange comfort filled with whispers of stories untold. She was drawn back to the place of her childhood, not out of nostalgia, but in desperate search of something lost. Her sister, Linda, who had vanished near the woods a year ago, leaving behind nothing but silence and unanswered questions. The manor's dilapidation mirrored Evelyn's own decay of spirit. Each creaking step on the warped floorboards echoed her hesitation, the air thick with dust and an unsettling emptiness that wrapped around her, colder than the autumn breeze outside. As she explored deeper into the confines of the manor, the familiar chill in her bones became intolerable, as though the very walls exhaled a long-held breath of despair. Shadows danced in the corners of her vision, ephemeral figures that skittered away when she turned to face them. Her heart raced, merging fear with hope that perhaps they might lead her to Linda. In the dim void of the parlor, she found an old, tattered diary left on an ornate but cracked writing desk. The pages smelled of mildew and time, the ink faded, but legible enough to reveal the musings of a previous occupant, Margaret Hartley, the last of the manor's lineage. The entries, at first whimsical, grew increasingly dark and erratic. Margaret wrote feverishly about the woods, about the things that watch from the darkness, and a curse that turned the manor's inhabitants against one another, leaving madness in its wake. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she took in the words, feeling an eerie connection. Was this unspoken torment the same that haunted her sister? With each page, the atmosphere thickened, suffocating her with dread. She could feel the presence of something lurking just out of sight, a malevolent watchfulness that seemed to swell from the very air, heavy with intent. As she closed the diary, a sudden gust rattled the window panes and sent a spray of dead leaves swirling into the room. It felt as if the manor itself was alive, the laughter of Margaret echoing through the corridors with a twisted mockery, beckoning her deeper into the heart of its secrets. Evelyn's breath quickened, her resolve faltering as she realized she was indeed not alone. Flashes of memory coursed through her mind. The last time she saw Linda, that desperate plea in her sister's eyes as she was drawn toward the woods, whispering of something beautiful, something alive. Each recollection twisted inside her like a knife. She could have followed, should have protected her. A shiver traveled down her spine as she felt the first trace of fingers, cold and insistent, brush against her back. Spinning, she found nothing. Only the mirror-like darkness extending beyond the flickering candlelight, swallowing the edges of her sanity. Driven by an uncontainable forcefulness, Evelyn pushed through the manor's oppressive confines, following the sudden pull towards the back door, the one leading into the thicket that swallowed her childhood home. The scent of damp earth mixed with a rotting sweetness broke over her like a wave, and she staggered outside, heart hammering against her ribcage. Each step into Wither Woods felt wrong, as though the very ground resented her intrusion. Shadows, stretched unnaturally and thinned into wisps, flowing like water around her ankles trying to pull her under. The deeper she ventured, the more reality seemed to collapse. A low hum began to vibrate beneath her feet, syncopating with the pulse in her temples. The woods appeared to warp subtly around her, trees twisting like skeletal fingers clawing at the sky. It was as if the very essence of the earth beneath was both alive and hungry. Branches wept with thick black sap that pooled like blood at her feet. For a moment she stumbled upon the remnants of a small clearing, the air thick with an overwhelming sadness, as if she had crossed a boundary established long ago. Then she saw it. A figure in the distance, illuminated by a moon that hung, low and swollen in the sky. Time slowed as she recognized the outline. Linda. Her heart soared for a moment, but as Evelyn drew closer, The arching branches overhead closed in as if to protect the figure from intrusion. Linda stood unnaturally still, her face turned away, yet Evelyn sensed that she was aware, that something unspeakable held her in thrall. The ground seemed to churn beneath her, and she reached out, hand trembling, and touched the damp bark of a nearby tree, feeling it pulse like a living thing. And then Linda turned. It was her sister, yet it was not. Her features were twisted and stretched, her eyes darkened to hollow pits, devoid of the light Evelyn had searched for. What had befallen Linda here? It was a question that clawed at her throat as the figure spoke without words, a quiet promise that echoed within her mind, a promise of reunion, of understanding. The hum swelled to a cacophony, drowning her thoughts as a kaleidoscope of memories flooded her mind. She was lost within them. Before she could respond, a sharp, piercing pain forced her to the ground as tendrils of darkness loomed overhead, wrapping around her limbs with a chilling embrace. Evelyn fought against it, heart racing, desperate to break free of the shadows that pressed in closer. But they were everywhere, hungry, insatiable. It was not just the curse of the Hartley lineage, it was the very essence of the woods, pulling her into their web of despair. The hum shifted into a mournful wail, dissonant, echoing with lost souls, those who had wandered too close to the heart of Wither Woods. Evelyn felt the overwhelming desperation as the darkness pulled Linda away from her, tearing at the threads of their bond. "Stay with me," she screamed, but the voice that echoed back was not her sister's. "You're home now," it whispered, a sound that curdled her blood. The tendrils tightened, her vision dulled, and with one last fractured thought of defiance, Evelyn let her head fall back, surrendering to the consuming night. When she opened her eyes again, the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the overgrown ruins of the manor. The diary lay open beside her, blank pages whispering on the wind. Evelyn stood alone, her own reflection staring back at her in the shattered glass of the manor's windows. But there was no warmth in her eyes, no recognition. The woods watched from the edges, and as she turned away, a familiar laughter echoed through the halls of the manor, promising that the family was once again whole, not as she knew it, but in a way that could never be undone. The wind howled through the crumbling remnants of Heartwood Asylum, a specter of insanity echoing its terrible history beneath the pale light of a half-moon. Once a haven for the troubled, the asylum had degenerated into a mausoleum of shattered dreams and unrelenting despair. At midnight, when shadows pooled in the corners and the air grew thick with an unseen weight, 25-year-old Clara Timmons stood at the entrance, daring herself to enter. Lost in her own turbulent mind, she sought not just answers, but a distraction from her chaotic life. Her recent breakup, the gnawing sensation that she was vanishing in the world. Clara stepped inside, her breath misting in the cold air as the door creaked ominously behind her. The air was thick with mildew and the faint metallic tang of rust, each step down the dilapidated corridor souring her stomach. Frayed wallpaper peeled like dead skin, revealing the grotesque underbelly of what man could create and later disown. Her smartphone flickered, the screen offering a small beacon of reassurance, tracking her way through the darkness, capturing memories of this eerie pilgrimage. But it failed to illuminate the dread that spilled from the corners of the room, an oppressive entity watching, waiting. A chill draped over her as she entered the main hall, once a vibrant gathering place for the asylum's occupants. Children, mothers, lost souls seeking solace. Now it lay in ruin, furniture scattered like forgotten hopes. Clara bit her lip, battling the rising tide of vulnerability. Behind her, the echoes of distant laughter. Was it real? Or a cruel taunt of her imagination? She ignored it, drawn to the remnants of a patient's room, the door askew as if resisting its fate. Inside, the dimness swallowed her. Papers fluttered like torn wings. She glanced at them, half-formed thoughts winding into a narrative of tortured lives. A name caught her eye, Elena Rosenberg, a girl who had roamed these halls decades ago. Legends hinted that she had forged a connection with something unspeakable, her laughter now ringing like a death knell in the asylum's heart. Clara felt a shiver ripple through her. Could someone like Elena still linger here, rotting beneath paint and dust, her spirit tied to the cruelty of these walls? As she explored deeper into the building, Clara's phone flickered again, displaying a short video with no memory of recording. Cobwebs danced in the corners, their silk-like threads glistening in the dim light. The video revealed shadows writhing against the walls, grotesque figures undulating like the surface of a disturbed pond, fleeting glimpses of illegible faces twisted in anguish. She shivered, a chill that threaded into her bones, as if the asylum itself were alive, breathing with her fears. The shadows in her peripheral vision grew more pronounced, coiling and unraveling, murmuring unholy secrets. Each room she entered reeked of despair, and Clara could almost hear the hushed cries of unseen occupants. Visions of Elena's story intertwined with her, a girl trapped in that world, not unlike Clara's own feelings of entrapment in life. The walls seemed to pulse, and every creak of the floorboard resonated like a heart beating in fear. In the heart of the asylum, she discovered the old chapel, the air thickening with a sense of reverence and dread. Graffiti marred the sanctity of the sacred space, yet it felt personal. Messages scrawled in anguish echoing a madness long forgotten. A flickering of candles suddenly illuminated the altar. She hadn't lit them, and the wax was still fresh, pooling like tears. Goosebumps prickled along her arms as an inexplicable heat poured in, mingling with the frigid air. Clara's heart raced as she tried to retreat, but the door slammed shut behind her, sealing her within this ghostly shrine. The candlelight wavered as whispers began to swirl around her, a cacophony of voices desperately vying for her attention. They blended with her own internal struggles, forming a dissonance she could not escape. Isolation turned to panic as images flashed before her, Elena's laughter morphing into a cacophonous wail, a distorted face reaching out to grasp her, pulling her into a void. But it was not just the voices that swirled. Clara felt their touch, a frigid grip encircling her throat, squeezing the air from her lungs. She fought against it, clawing at the invisible hands, yet couldn't escape the grasp of centuries of sorrow entangling her existence. The candles flickered violently, their flames reaching out like fingers illuminating the walls of torment. A vivid tableau of the broken patients etched into her mind revealed a paradox of wretchedness, not just as victims, but as harbingers of something darker, their unfulfilled desires morphing into a grotesque hunger that echoed through time. Desperation clawed at Clara's insides as her thoughts raced. She realized Elena was not merely a haunting echo in this asylum. She had become part of the wretched fabric that made up its very essence. Clara's desire to uncover despair had morphed into an unholy invitation, one that transcended the living and the dead. The realization struck her like a dagger. By seeking distractions from her own life, she had inadvertently called upon that same discontent, drawing eyes from the beyond, inviting Elena's energy to fuel her own shadow. An overwhelming sense of dread washed over her as the voices crescendoed, harmonizing into a malevolent serenade that reverberated in the very marrow of her bones. The shadows converged, their forms becoming tangible, clawing their way to her, seeking to consume her essence. Through the din, one voice broke through, clearer than the rest. A whisper that promised freedom, a release from pain offered in exchange for her own despair. But Clara knew that surrender meant darkness, an eternal binding to this decaying husk of a building. She pushed against the wall, seeking the refuge of reality, but the shadows surged forward, a tide of grief pulling her under. Just as she thought she would lose herself entirely, she caught a glimpse of the chapel's window, the moonlight perched just beyond, a beacon of hope. Summoning what remained of her will, Clara lunged toward the door, her heart racing as the shadows clawed at her heels. With one final push, she hurled herself against it, and it swung open with a finality that echoed her resolve. As she stumbled out into the moonlit night, she felt a strange sense of absolution, but it was not a release from the asylum's grasp. Clara sprinted away, breathless, yet the voices whispered with each heartbeat, promising retribution. It was a dark invitation, one she could no longer deny. The asylum's laughter chased her, intertwining with her own. She realized it wasn't just the asylum that had held her captive. It was her own fractured mind wearing the skin of its pain. And as she exited the gates of Heartwood, the shadows danced beside her, coaxing her deeper into their twisted embrace, leaving her standing precariously at the narrow threshold between despair and freedom, forever in their thrall. Joseph's return to Hollow Ridge was like stepping into a suffocating nightmare. The once vibrant town clung to memories of warmth and laughter, but now it stood shrouded in a heavy veil of fog, remnants of a once bustling world swallowed whole by time. Closed shutters and crumbling facades whispered stories of abandonment, while the acrid scent of decay hung in the air, sickeningly sweet, as he drove through the eerily silent streets. Everything had changed since his parents vanished, nearly 2 decades ago, their absence a shadow that tainted his every thought. Hollow Ridge had claimed its prize, and yet he remained, driven by an unyielding hope that the truth still lay buried among the ruins. As he parked in front of the old diner, its neon sign buzzing feebly, nostalgia clawed at him. Memories brushed against his consciousness, a booth stained with spilled coffee, laughter echoing in the corners, a jukebox playing the old hits. But those echoes transformed into hollow groans, an unsettling reminder that the past was alive with secrets and shadows. Stepping inside, the atmosphere grew thick with the weight of his anticipation and dread. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light from cracked windows, and a chill lingered despite the sun filtering weakly through the gloom. Abandonment whispered through the diner, coiling like smoke around his senses, erasing the semblance of warmth he had hoped to find. Joseph's footsteps reverberated across the cracked linoleum floor, each sound amplified by the hollow silence. The air tasted metallic. He could feel it clinging to his throat like a predator waiting in the dark. A newspaper lay crumpled on the counter, its headline announcing the mysterious disappearance of several townspeople, events that spiraled into a tapestry of fear and confusion. The hairs on his neck prickled as he turned the pages, the scent of damp paper mingling with the stale grease of long uncooked meals. His heart raced. He had come seeking answers, but the questions swirled like autumn leaves caught in a whirlwind. What truly happened in Hollow Ridge? He climbed into the peeling vinyl booth, staring into the depths of the diner's darkness. The back door swung open with a soft creak, revealing a narrow alley overwhelmed by shadows. Something whispered from that alley, a sound almost like the faint howl of wind, but there was a rhythm to it that felt wrong, a heartbeat that pulsed with malice. The urge to flee warred with his curiosity, as an inexplicable sense of danger wrapped around him, squeezing tighter with every passing moment. Countless nights spent imagining his family's fate bubbled to the surface, fierce and raw, igniting a desperate determination. As night began to fall, Joseph ventured outside, the fog thickening like wool pressed against his skin. The street lamps emitted a feeble glow, struggling against the oppressive darkness that clawed at him. But he pressed on, moving towards the edge of town, where the woods loomed like silent sentinels. He could almost hear the echoes of familiar laughter, his mother's warm voice pooling in the air, beckoning him forward. But the laughter unraveled into something sinister, taunting him as shadows danced teasingly just beyond the tree line. It felt as if something watched him from the depths of the blackness, a malevolent presence that stirred uneasily, waiting for him to venture deeper. Moments later, he stood at the threshold of the forest's embrace, its gnarled branches stretching out like skeletal fingers. A dismal dread pulsed around him, paralyzing yet oddly compelling. He stepped over the threshold, the ground squelching beneath his feet, a gruesome carpet of wet leaves and muck. As he penetrated deeper into the woods, a chilling breeze gusted through the trees, carrying whispers that crawled under his skin. The scent of damp earth enveloped him, mingling with something coppery, a metallic tang that hung heavily in the atmosphere. And then, there it was, a flicker of movement in his periphery. He turned quickly, heart hammering, but found only shadows that darted away, always just out of sight. The forest was alive, breathing. Biting wind nipped at his skin, reigniting his fight-or-flight instinct. Each snap of twigs underfoot seemed amplified, drawing eyes from the lurking darkness. Fear stung his lungs and his mind raced with questions. What lived here and what had it done to his family? Suddenly an overwhelming sensation washed over him, an intimate awareness that he was not alone. A twist in his gut warned him to turn back, but he pressed on, drawn by an unspoken compulsion. The trees closed in around him, weaving their branches tightly, leaving narrow paths coated in darkness. Each hushed breath sent vibrations through the air, and the weight of unseen watchers bore down on him, thickening like fog. Memories of his childhood surfaced, the games he played, the stories his mother told him about the old ones who roamed the woods, the warnings that had kept him tethered to the border, never to venture into the unknown. Then he spotted it, a shimmering glimmer amidst the underbrush, reminiscent of something precious yet corrupted. It was a toy, one his younger self had lost, an old rusted figure with an unblinking glass eye that seemed to be filled with dread. Crumpled beside, it lay a faded flyer, yellowed and decayed, detailing the likeliness of missing children reappearing, their stories smothered by the fog of time. His heart sank. Panic screamed within him. This was not just a journey through abandoned landscapes. It was a descent into a festering wound of his childhood, a horror that loomed in the backdrop, now unfolding before him. As he turned, something shifted in the shadows around him, a presence that shifted from mere observation to raw hunger. His panic escalated into terror, and with each hurried step he felt the air thickening, constricting around him. A low growl punctuated the darkness, reverberating through the eerie silence. The trees seemed to close in tighter. The very ground beneath him shifted. He was ensnared in a vast maw, a trap set by unseen hands with a hunger that he could almost taste. In that moment, he turned to flee. But the path he'd taken had twisted into confusion. Each way he turned held only the oppressive dark. A deafening chorus of whispers filled the air, calling his name and his family's, weaving through the branches like tendrils of despair. He sprinted, adrenaline coursing through his veins while shadows darted closer, pulling at the edges of his coat, threatening to entangle him in their embrace. The stench of rot and the cacophony of whispers crescendoed, drowning his thoughts in a symphony of madness that surged through him. Abruptly, the shadows parted, revealing a clearing. Bathed in an otherworldly silver light, it felt like a liminal space between reality and nightmare. In the center stood a grotesque figure draped in shifting shadows, its mouth curling into a semblance of a smile, yet its eyes glowed with depths, richer than the blackest night. The whispers intensified, weaving a tapestry of his fears. His memories twisted and melded into a reality that felt all too tangible. And then he understood. This creature was the architect of his childhood nightmares, the one wrapped in the echoes of every story told. Hope shattered as suffocating dread enveloped him, transforming his fear into despair, the truth colliding with his desperate yearning for closure. He had come seeking answers, but all he found was the twisted manifestation of his unrelenting sorrow. There was no escape, no solace in the truth. It lay buried in the roots of Hollow Ridge, and the creature was a hungry parasite feeding on its victims' lost hopes and dreams. As the world around him faded into an indifferent darkness, Joseph realized he was just another story woven into the fabric of the town, not seeking resolution, but retribution, an echo carried forever in the fog that cloaked Hollow Ridge.